Yes. Okay. So let me introduce our speaker today. Our speaker is Dr. Nicola Rennie, who is a statistician and a data scientist at Jumping Rivers, located in the UK. I'm really sorry, I'm having to multitask quite a lot, but we will proceed. Okay, and she's quite passionate about using R to solve problems. Like I've said, she currently works as a data scientist at Jumping Rivers, and having previously completed a PhD in statistics and operational research at Lancaster University. During April 2022, she did participate in the 30-day challenge. That is a data visualization challenge where participants create a new chart each day based on the daily prompts. And in this talk, she will discuss why and how she created the 30 charts, the aspects she found most challenging, and some of the interesting things she discovered in the R along the way. And lastly, we will have a session where she will show us how she created some of the plots she had she contributed to. And at this point, I will pass the virtual mic to Dr. Nicola. Please go ahead, and I'll stop sharing and go ahead and share with us the talk.
Perfect, thank you. All right. Okay. So I thought I'd split this talk into sort of two sections. So the first section will be sort of a general presentation about some of the charts I created during the challenge. And then the second half, I will do some live coding and we will recreate one of those charts together. So to start off, I thought I'd just sort of tell you a little bit about who I am and how I can sort of got into the chart challenge. So I finished my PhD in statistics and operational research about 9 months ago, and shortly after joined Jumping Rivers as a data scientist. So I use R essentially every day. Most of Jumping Rivers does likewise, although we do use some Python as well. So in my job as a data scientist, I do a combination of lots of different things. I do some data science consultancy. So sometimes that's things like building Shiny apps or more sort of statistical advice. I also do internal projects, again, using R. So doing things like creating reports, packages for styling plots, building websites using Blogdown. And then I also do training courses as well, again, mostly in R. I've actually just finished teaching a course on ggplot today. So very much thinking about plots today. And I'm going to keep doing more training on sort of data visualization. We're starting some Tableau courses quite soon. So when I was kind of putting this talk together, I started thinking about how long I've actually been using R. And I think I first opened RStudio about 9 years ago. I had a sort of compulsory stats course during my undergrad degree. And I will be honest and say I absolutely hated R the first time I tried it. And it was sort of a few years later, sort of at the end of my undergrad and starting my PhD, where someone sort of introduced me to the tidyverse, and suddenly it all started to make a lot more sense to me. And when I kind of started working more on sort of tidyverse stuff, I very quickly got into ggplot2. I think it's definitely the R package I use the most. And I think for me, I really like data visualization because it's that kind of intersection between like maths and stats. So the sort of stuff I'm good at, and then the more artistic side of things, which is stuff that I really enjoy. And in my head, sort of data visualization falls somewhere kind of in the middle. And once you've made a very basic chart, you can kind of be a bit more artistic and a bit more creative to add some styling and make it look really good. So I think that's why I enjoy data visualization quite so much.
Dr. Nicola, just a minute. Is it possible to make the slides quite in like presenter mode or larger?
I can zoom in a little bit. Is this that better?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that should be okay. Yes.
All right. Good. So when I started kind of learning art and learning how the Tidyverse worked, I started participating in Tidy Tuesday, kind of on a weekly basis, and that's kind of, it really helped me get to grips with sort of working with real data and creating data visualizations. And it is something that I do recommend to my students as a really good way to learn. So when I think I first heard of the 30-day chart challenge and the 30-day map challenge, sort of back in November on Twitter. And in my head, it was essentially going to be a very intense Tidy Tuesday. So essentially, it's the same sort of idea. It's a data visualization challenge, and you're making one chart every day of the month. You kind of get a daily prompt and category. I think the other thing that sort of drew me to the 30-day chart challenge is that it's not restricted to R. So although this is an R Ladies meetup, I will kind of mention some of the other tools I sort of used along the way. So it was, it was organized in April. So there were 30 different prompts. So these were the 30 different prompts. You kind of also had 5 different categories as well. I will be honest and say I didn't stick to the kind of prompts and categories very rigidly. I found it quite difficult sometimes to find data or a particular plot that I could match to a prompt and a category at the same time. But it was kind of a nice way having those 5 categories to think about, okay, what types of plot do I typically use to visualize this type of data or this particular type of relationship. So I think when I started out at the beginning of April, it's quite a lot of work and quite a big challenge. So for me, kind of having a reason why I was participating in the challenge was quite important. So I kind of had the initial goal is that I wanted to try one kind of new tool for each of the 5 categories. So as I said, I mostly use R, and if someone asks me to make a plot, I will essentially turn straight to ggplot2. But what I kind of wanted to do was explore some other kind of tools and software that was out there as well. So I wanted to create at least 5 plots using something else. I also thought the 30-day chart challenge is kind of a low pressure environment to try something new, whether that's like new software or a new type of chart. If you try it and it goes terribly wrong and it doesn't look very nice, it really doesn't matter. In comparison to, if you're doing a project for work and you're trying to make a chart that looks good, that doesn't feel like the time to be experimental. So this was kind of a low pressure environment just to try new things and get some feedback from other people on whether they thought it worked or not. And it was also kind of about making the charts that I wanted to make. When you're at work, someone says, oh, make me a bar chart or make me a line plot or whatever. But this is like, oh, I can make any chart that I want to with any data set I want to. And it's quite nice just to have that freedom to kind of like play with R essentially. So in terms of how I made the 30 charts, as you can see, it was overwhelmingly in R. I did manage to make at least one chart in something else using those for each of the 5 categories. You can see here I didn't sort of pursue them much further beyond that. I think the vast majority of the charts I made were in R, and specifically, I think all of the charts I made in R were probably made using ggplot2 as well. Okay. So what I thought I'd do next is sort of quickly go through each of the 30 charts and just sort of show you the charts I made and mention kind of which packages I used and essentially what was going through my brain when I was making them. I'm happy to take questions during, if anybody has any questions. I can't do sort of an in-depth discussion on all 30 charts in the time we have, but if there's something specific you want to know about a chart, do just ask. So yeah, these were all 30. So for day one, for the sort of part to whole theme, I made sort of a donut chart and used the GeoFacet package. So you're getting a sort of faceted chart for each country in Europe, looking at the sort of percentage of the female labor force who are in work. For day two, it was the pictogram prompt. So I looked at sort of diagnosis rates of breast cancer in the UK. I originally made this chart using the waffle package in R. But I ended up sort of experimenting and created this just using geom text instead. So this is all just sort of base ggplot without any additional packages. The reason for that is I'd been creating some other charts at work using the sort of waffle package, and the waffle package has a lot of dependencies, and I was trying to get rid of those dependencies and ended up sort of recreating the chart just in basic ggplot rather than bringing in more external packages. For day three.
Dr. Nicola, I have a question regarding the pictogram. I've seen such plots online, but I never know what exactly the plot is meant to tell me, because like now I see that we have when I look at the color intensity, so the color intensity is decreasing as we like go down. Yeah. So what exactly is the purpose of what is like a pictogram displaying, and why would I want to have such a plot?
That's a really good question. I tend to think of sort of pictograms or waffle charts as being a better alternative to pie charts. So they're less about you know, the number of points you have, and more about sort of the proportions. But it's kind of easier for someone to visually interpret a waffle chart or a pictogram like this than a bar chart. You can kind of see the percentage a little bit more clearly, because you got that sort of linear relationship. You can block it off into rectangles in your mind rather than trying to figure out angles on a circle. So like each icon here represents I think it's something like 7,000 people. So you can kind of, when you're sort of counting up each individual icon, it's kind of representing a specific number of people. So that's how I usually interpret them.
Thank you. That really helps.
Right. So for day three, this is a very vague theme of historical. So I wanted to compare sort of house prices between 1980 and 2020. And I think a lot of the time you get things like line charts or slope charts. And I just thought, okay, let's just use some circles. So I used the GG Force package here. You can create circles with geom circle. I just kind of wanted to show the relationship in terms of the area. So what sort of percentage are you looking at? Again, kind of a slight alternative to pie charts in some sense, but you're kind of looking at part of a whole. What percentage of house prices versus income here. Okay. So day 4 was the first day that I stepped away from R and tried Tableau instead. So I had this kind of tree map, circular tree map. I wasn't actually able to make this directly in Tableau. I had to sort of use a sort of an observable widget to create the polygons for me and then feed those into Tableau. So it wasn't 100% Tableau. And once I'd done it, I thought, well, I've never made a chart like this in R either. So I sort of thought, well, I'll just try and recreate it and see what I get. And I was able to essentially create the same chart in both tools. And I think it was actually kind of equally easy to do them in both, which was quite nice. Then for day 5, I just
Nicola, we have a question.
yeah,
Sorry
go
for
for it.
yes. So from the previous, before we have been asked what R package was this, and another question is where do you get your ideas for creating the different plots? I feel that could be like a general answer at the very end, but you can give us a gist.
Yeah. So the R package for day 4 was just ggplot 2 on its own. So I used the sort of polygons I had created for Tableau to feed into this as well. So the shapes of the polygons themselves weren't generated in R. I used observable HQ. There's a little widget there. I can send a link at the end if I can find it again, to create sort of each individual polygon shape. And then you feed that into ggplot2 and with geom polygon, and it sort of colors them for you. So yeah, ggplot2 with a little bit of help from observable to create the polygons for day 4. Yeah, I can come back to the where do you get your ideas question at the end, if that's all right. So day 5, the theme of slope. This is essentially an area chart. You'll probably notice as I go through the slides that I am apparently quite a fan of area charts, and I created quite a lot of them during the chart challenge. They seem to become my sort of go-to plot for creating, for working with time series data. I find them a little bit nicer and a little bit easier to read than your sort of traditional line charts, I think. I also quite like charts like this where you can kind of pull the title and the text or down into the chart area rather than the more traditional stick the title on top of the plot. So kind of trying to bring those titles and the text into the actual to be part of the chart. Day 6 was very similar to day 2. It was another pictogram. Again, created using essentially the exact same code, but using facets to create the 3 plots. I found this was the sort of repeating codes throughout the challenge was something I did quite a few times. Like creating a brand new plot every day was going to be a lot of work. And so in order to kind of actually make 30 charts, I ended up sort of adapting charts that I already had rather than starting from scratch every day. So for day 6, it was sort of, I already had the data set kind of given to me from the Our World in Data site. And I thought, okay, this will also work with the same sort of waffle charts or pictograms again. And I think this was quite nice. For day 7, again, I think for this one I was kind of trying to keep it more simple in terms of the chart and focus more on the styling. So it kind of exploring fonts and different colors. So this is what you generally call a sort of lollipop chart. In reality, it is just sort of line segments. So using geom segment from ggplot and adding on some points on top. So in terms of the construction of the actual plot itself is reasonably simple, but then it was sort of figuring out sort of positions of fonts and axis labels and things that took the time with this chart. I'll come back to fonts a little bit later when we're going through the example, but I quite like the sort of display fonts here that I've shown here. Day 8 was another day that I kind of stepped away from R and tried using Figma instead. I'd never really heard of Figma before for using plots, but I'd seen a couple of other people on Twitter also doing the chart challenge who said they'd used Figma, and I thought I'll see what the fuss is about. And yeah, it was quite easy to create sort of simple charts. Again, it's this kind of has a kind of user interface, a little bit like Tableau, sort of click and drag what you want on your X and Y axes, and it made this kind of area chart for me. One thing I did find kind of throughout the challenge is that doing stuff like adding annotations and captions was much easier in things like Tableau or Figma in terms of positioning the text. You can do it in R, but I always find it a little bit tricky and a little bit annoying to get the text exactly where you want it to be in R sometimes. So yeah, things like Tableau and Figma are kind of nice for finishing off plots, I think. So this was another area chart. So yeah, kind of arranged this using patchwork. So I had the sort of percentage area chart in the top left, and then I created a second chart with just text. So this isn't annotated. This is kind of a chart all of its own, this text area, and then using facets with the geom area on the bottom there. I really liked day 10. I don't know if you really call it a chart, but I thought it looked pretty. So this was me sort of visualizing the digits of pi. So sort of created a spiral, figured out what the X and Y coordinates of every point should be. And then the points are colored based on the value of the digit from 0 to 9. Yeah, I really like this one. But yeah, I'm not sure it's a chart quite. Yeah, but just visualizing the digits of pi is what I did for day 10. Day 11 had the circular theme. Again, this wasn't a type of chart that I hadn't really used much before. There is a package in R called Pack Circles, and that's kind of what I used to get the shapes of the circles, which you can then use with ggplot. Just using geom polygon, and again, so in terms of the ggplot code, it was kind of already there from previous plots. It was just how do I actually make these circles? And yeah, the pack circles plot package is you sort of put in your data of your different countries and your different values, and it creates the polygons for you. So that was quite a nice way of cutting out some of the work for this. It creates the circles, tells you how to position them with each other. The only thing that was a little bit tricky with this was the sort of text labels, because some of the circles are so tiny. It was difficult to figure out what labels to put on which circles. So I ended up only including the sort of euro amount for the larger countries here. Okay, so day 12, there's a lot going on for day 12. So the idea was that you create a chart based on the same theme as plots that the Economist uses. If for everyone who used R for the 30-day chart challenge, they kind of had a head start because the HRBR themes package has an Economist theme built in, so it was quite easy to make your ggplot and then go plus theme Economist, and suddenly it looks exactly the way you want it to. The only thing I sort of had to add was this sort of red rectangle here, and I did that using the grid package, and then combined that with my sort of original plot using cowplot. So cowplot is quite a nice package if you want to layer either different plots, or if you add text on top of an existing plot, or draw some rectangles. That's essentially what this is. We use the grid package to draw a rectangle and cowplot to stick it on top of the plot we had. The other package I used for day 12 was the ggSide. package, and that is used to add these density plots on the sides of the sort of scatter plot. I have used ggSide quite a few times. I quite like it. It's kind of a slightly more interesting way of displaying those density plots rather than sort of having them side by side with your data. You can kind of see what's going on in each variable in your scatter plot at the same time. So I thought this was quite nice. The actual plot itself, scatter plot and the fitted line, I don't actually like that much. But I think it was at the end of a long day and I thought, okay, that's enough. You have to draw a line under it somewhere. So yeah, there's quite a lot of different packages and different themes going on for day 12. For day 13 in the theme of correlation, created two plots side by side. The one on the left is a scatter plot, just with a straight line fitted through it with geom smooth. The one on the right is probably a little bit more interesting. So I used the maps package, which again works with ggplot to get the outline of the United States, and then the biscale package to get this sort of color scale where you're changing colors based on two different variables, which I thought was quite interesting. I don't make a lot of maps on a regular basis, but I do quite like these maps changing colors based on variables, and it was a nice way to kind of include two different variables rather than making two maps to include both variables on the same plot. For day 14, the theme was three-dimensional, and I really don't like three-dimensional plots. I think they're very difficult to interpret visually. I'm never sure what I'm supposed to be looking at when I'm looking at a 3D plot. So I thought rather than spending time figuring out how to make a really nice 3D plot, let's spend some time learning something that is probably going to be useful to me. So this is where I started learning Quarto. So I had never used Quarto before the 30-day chart challenge, but it is probably something that I'm going to be using a lot in the future. So I thought I would give it a go. And I really liked it. I had to remember how to write code in Python, which it's been a while. But this with Quarto, I was able to kind of have side-by-side Python and R code, and having essentially the same plot created in two different languages, created in the one document. And I thought that was pretty cool. I didn't really like the outputs of the plots. I didn't put a lot of effort into styling them, but I learned kind of how Quarto worked, so I still kind of took that as a win for day 14. So for day 15, I used the Palmer Penguins dataset from the Palmer Penguins package. I quite like these kind of color gradients for showing sort of distributions. Initially kind of thought it was a little bit overkill in the sense that you have a box plot, a sort of density curve, the rainfall plot, and the color gradients all showing the same thing. But I do actually think it looks quite nice. And it is a couple of different ways to visualize the same data. So I think the package for this was ggdist, I think. Yeah, so I've used that quite a few times to get those kind of color gradients in the backgrounds of your box plots, just for something kind of a little bit different. I think it's kind of easier for this one on the right that you're kind of it's easier to see that it's kind of bimodal. You have these sort of two darker areas, whereas sort of just looking at the density curve, it's a little bit harder to see. So I do think they can be quite useful as well as looking quite nice. For day 16, I created this nested bar chart. So I kind of think of nested bar charts as an alternative to stacked bar charts. So if you're used to making bar charts in ggplot, by default, you would kind of get these three colors sort of stacked on top of each other. But I find those quite difficult to interpret visually. It's kind of hard to compare sort of years to each other, and it's difficult to visually interpret what the sort of ratio of groups are as well. So this kind of nested bar chart was an alternative to that. So if you're looking at the gray bars, you're kind of seeing the long-term trend. And when you're looking at the different colored bars nested inside, you can kind of see the relationship between the three different types of pollution there as well. So yeah, I do kind of recommend nested bar charts over stacked bar charts. It initially, I think it takes a little bit longer to get your head around what the plot is trying to show, but once you kind of understand what it's trying to show, it's easier to draw the correct conclusions, I think, instead of stacked bar charts. Day 17, I wasn't entirely sure if I liked this plot or not. It was, again, a little bit experimental for me. The main thing I wanted to sort of figure out from this plot was arranging the text labels. You can't see it quite clearly on this image, but these text labels are sort of figuring out the angle so that you can read them all the way around the circle. This is also just base ggplot. So just geom text, geom point, and geom segment to draw some lines as well. I think, yeah, I was going more for the design element than the readability of plot. I don't think you can get any conclusions out of this plot itself, but it was more about figuring out how do I get those angles for the text correct. Day 18, I don't think I was feeling very inspired on day 18. I went for a kind of simple plot. So this is kind of a slope chart, just looking at the difference between 2001 and 2021. Essentially the number of hours people have to work to kind of escape poverty in a range of different countries. Yeah, the only kind of issue I had with this was arranging the text labels so that they weren't kind of sitting on top of each other or overlapping. So I had to sort of figure out how to use the ggRepel package. So ggRepel works with geom text, and essentially the labels are repelled from each other so that they don't overlap. And I eventually, after sitting looking at it for quite a while, I managed to figure out that you can repel them in just one direction, rather than I had labels all over the place originally when I made this plot at first. Day 19, another area chart for me, again looking at time series data. I wasn't entirely sure if the data for this was correct, so I wasn't completely happy with this plot. This sort of big spike here seemed concerning and to me felt like the data was incorrect, but I couldn't figure out why. So I eventually gave up trying to figure out why. The other thing I did for this chart was try to create this kind of shading, this kind of color gradient. There isn't a kind of nice way in ggplot to do fill colors with gradients, so it's getting darker as the value gets higher. So what I actually ended up doing here is creating the area chart with a darker color, and then you essentially layer lots and lots of lines on top of it. So you're essentially adding lots of white lines on top of this to try and change the color gradient so you have sort of a higher density of white lines down the bottom compared to the top. It didn't come out quite the way I intended it to. I still have some odd dark stripes here, but I thought it was kind of an interesting way of creating color gradients when ggplot doesn't generally let you do that. Day 20 was another day of using something other than R. So I used Inkscape. which is a kind of free photo editing app. So this kind of created a sort of timeline along the bottom and then added lots of images. Having thought about this a little bit, this would be possible to create in R if you're using sort of GG image or Magic to add in images, but I find it really slow and really annoying. So I think making a plot like this is kind of image heavy. Stepping away from R was probably a good idea, but I do quite like the way that this plot came out by the end of it. Okay, day 21, I'm back on the area charts again. Yeah, there's not a lot to say about this one. It's kind of, again, similar to plots that I've made earlier in the challenge, just kind of pulling in a slightly different data source and then, yeah, simple area chart here. The data is looking at wave height, so I tried, I'm not sure if I succeeded, to create a kind of wave-like plot using the two blue area colors instead. Day 22, I really like this one. So this is trying to visualize all of the RGB colors in the entire color spectrum. So going between 0 and 255, red and green on the X and Y axes, and then animating as the value of blue changes over time. I originally tried to create this chart, this animation using GG Animate, and then my laptop really didn't like that. It started all sorts of warning messages, and eventually gave up with GG Animate. I think the file size just got too large. So what I ended up with doing was creating 256 separate plots. So I made a function to create a plot for a particular value of blue, and then used per to map over that and create the 256 plots. And then I sort of stuck them together using a GIF maker online. And that process was much, much faster than GG Animate. Did have to kind of compromise on the file quality a little bit. The original file size was far too large for me to upload to Twitter as well. So it is, you can see here, a little bit blurry, but I do like the idea behind this. I just didn't have the computing power or the allowance from Twitter to actually make a sort of high quality version of this. Okay. Day 23, once again, back on the area charts. It did say they would be a bit of a theme. So yeah, looking at life expectancy in a couple of hundred countries, I think, from the Gapminder dataset. Sort of, again, this is kind of like an area chart, but here I kind of tried to color the background to look at the sort of life expectancy lost in some sense when you're comparing the past or in countries where life expectancy isn't quite so high. The Financial Times theme for day 24, quite similar to the Economist theme one for me. Again, there are kind of built-in Financial Times themes in GG Themes package, I think. And similarly, again, sort of I added this black rectangle at the top using grid and then stuck that together with Cowplot as well. And using the GG Ridges package to create the density plots for different years sort of stacked together. Okay, so on to kind of the last category, which was looking, I think the last category was sort of uncertainty, and looking at the theme of trend. So I created this kind of spiral chart. I've seen a few spiral charts out in the wild recently. I think there was one looking at sort of COVID cases. I wasn't entirely happy with this plot, but I did kind of like the fact that you can see this jump here between 1880 and sort of 2020. you can quite clearly see that there is a big jump, whereas if you've done a more traditional sort of line chart, you might not see that jump quite so clearly, I think, there. Day 26, I haven't shown the whole plot here. So the theme was interactive, and I made this using Plotly in R. So if you've never used Plotly before, it's kind of a way of making interactive plots with sort of HTML widgets. It has a nice function, ggplotly. So if you build a kind of static plot in ggplot, you can then turn it into an interactive plot just with one function, which is quite nice. I think this was also a Tidy Tuesday dataset where I could try to combine Tidy Tuesday with 30-day chart challenge to essentially reduce the number of plots I was trying to make. So I think this is one of the few charts where I actually did some analysis rather than just plotting the raw data. So I did sentiment analysis here using the tidy text package on the sort of original text data. Yeah, so a little bit different in a couple of ways. This one sort of do some sentiment analysis to create a new data set, visualize that in ggplot, and then convert it to an interactive HTML plot using ggplotly function from Plotly. Okay, day 27, I guess I did a little bit more analysis here, so sort of fitting some forecasts. The main reason I fitted some forecasts was to play with the facet zoom function. So this is I think it's in ggforce. So in the same way that you can create facets in ggplot, facet zoom essentially creates a second plot, but it's like zoomed in on a specific part of your original plot. So it feels like a little bit of a contrived example, but I wanted to see how it works. Essentially, I've never used it before. I think this is quite nice. I'll zoom in on just the forecasted area so you can get a bit of a closer look about that. I also think when I was sort of playing around with facet zoom, I thought it might be quite useful for bar charts. So generally speaking, we always like our bar charts to start at 0. But if your bars are quite tall and quite similar, it might be kind of nice to be able to zoom in on the top to see the sort of relative differences as well. So I think facet zoom is definitely something that I will use again in the future. And it was quite nice to just have a chance to play around with it and see how it worked. Day 28 was also not in R. So I tried using raw graphs. I was actually quite impressed with this. Essentially just upload your data set, click which columns are sort of your X and Y variables, click which type of plot, and this was kind of produced straight away. And I think it looks quite good given how little effort it took to actually kind of create this kind of calendar heat map. So I was kind of here trying to visualize the difference on each day from the annual temperature. The full plot, I've kind of only shown part of it here. Went back from sort of 1960s, I think. So there were a lot of rows, and you can kind of see the pattern of how the sort of length of summer is changing over time when you look at the full plot. So I was quite impressed with raw graphs in terms of how quickly I could get a chart that looked quite good. So day 29, it was when I figured out how to make a flowchart in R. This is the plot that we're gonna go through together in just a second with some live coding, so I won't talk about it too much now. But the final chart I created for the last day was this kind of alluvial chart, so looking at how sort of different age groups map to different continents for the world's population. So that's using the GG alluvial package, which is quite nice and quite easy to use as well, and again compatible with ggplot2. So that is kind of the 30 charts. I'll do a kind of quick recap of the things I learned before we move on to some live coding. I think in terms of looking back and thinking, what did I actually learn? In terms of technical things, it was essentially new R packages. So I'd never done, sorry, anything with facet zoom from ggforce before. I'd never used Quarto before. I'd never done sentiment analysis with tidy text before. So those were all kind of brand new things that I now think are quite useful, and I can definitely see myself using them in the future. The other kind of takeaway, which might sound a little bit odd when you're talk about R, is that non-R tools can be very helpful. Like I said, particularly for things like annotations or just that very last stage where you're playing around with design, you want to add a logo or add, some text in a particular area. Yes, you can do it with R, but trying to sort of position text and images in R, I personally find really annoying, especially when it is that last stage and you're almost done. Just opening up your plot in something like Inkscape or Tableau or Figma and just typing out your text and dragging it over to where you want it to be is much quicker. So sometimes stepping outside of R can be useful. I think I used to be a bit of an R purist, as in I used to think, oh, I should make all of my plot, every single element, it should be done in R. And somehow I thought if it was done in Tableau or Inkscape or something, then it somehow made it a less good plot. But yeah, I definitely don't think that anymore. I think the little finishing touches, not using R can definitely be to be helpful. The other thing that I've kind of started doing after this is that if you're using code multiple times, put it in an R package and save yourself some heartbreak. So I was using the same sort of theming elements in multiple plots and just changing, the color of the text or the color of the background or the font name. I've since sort of put together an R package that I use for styling my own plots. So I can add that kind of consistent styling and just tweak little bits of it. It's much quicker than using the theme function and setting out sort of 60 different arguments. Just save them all together into an R package. Yeah, in terms of the things I found difficult, it was actually finding the time for it. So even when you are, repeating styles or using the same data set multiple times, it is still a bit of a time commitment to make a chart every single day, especially when you're sort of coming away from work where you've just been making charts and using R all day. So then kind of be like, oh, I'm going to go and use R, make another chart. It can get quite tiring. So I ended up not actually making charts every single day. I would maybe make sort of 3 charts in one day using the same data set. And then I knew I could take some breaks and have a few days. It's also perfectly fine not to do all 30 days. I would say that if you are thinking about participating next year or in any of the other challenges, don't feel like you have to do every single day. Even if you just do one day, that's really great. All right. So I'm going to go on to the second part of this talk and do some live coding and recreate the Goldilocks decision tree plot that I did for day 29, which is this chart here. So this, in essence, is just a flowchart, right? So I tried to find a package that would let me make flowcharts in R. I thought about using the grid package because the grid package is essentially your sort of fundamental elements of how you make plots. It has rectangles, it has circles, it has lines. Theoretically, it has everything you need to make a flowchart. But it was still going to feel a bit manual having to actually draw out each individual box. There's also the diagram R package. I've only used this once. It kind of connects to the dot programming language, which is for flowcharts. I didn't find it very easy to work with. There's also these kind of 4 packages here. There's iGraph, GG Network, GG Net2, GG Graph, which are all sort of for visualizing network data. Although a flowchart is kind of a network, the layout of a flowchart is kind of more important than a lot of network packages let you have in terms of the control you have over the layout. And a lot of these kind of network packages are also harder to customize. So they didn't quite do what I was looking for. I put ticks in here as well. It is technically a LaTeX package, but you can do LaTeX in R. And it is what I've previously used to do flowcharts in the past. So I had some flowcharts in my PhD thesis to try and explain the process of the method I was describing. It's quite useful. Anytime you have a process with multiple steps or multiple decisions, flowcharts can be quite useful. So essentially, my takeaway from my initial exploration was there isn't anything that's going to make this flowchart in R for me. But I thought I like ggplot2. And realistically, a flowchart is some rectangles, some text, and some lines. Okay, now ggplot2 can do all three of those things. So I decided to try and make a flowchart from scratch. And that's what we're going to do now. So I'm going to hop over to RStudio to go through this. All of the code that I will write is on these slides. So if you're following through the slides on your own, or you want to look back later, all of the codes will be available. So you don't need to worry about kind of copying this through. Just give me a second. All right. Okay. So to create a flowchart in R, I say load 4 packages. One of them is the entire tidyverse, but we load 4 different packages. So tidyverse, I'm going to use the iGraph package that I've mentioned already. That's going to help us with the sort of layout of the different points in the flowchart. I'm also using the showText package for fonts, and I'm using R Cartocolor for my color schemes. So I'll point out where these 3 packages are being used. I decided not to live code this first bit just because it's so long and takes ages to type out. Okay, but the first part was essentially defining my data set. Okay, so I created a table, okay, and my table should be a data frame of edges in my flowchart. Okay, so all of the edges that you see here, that's what's being displayed first of all. Okay, where does the edge start from and to? The only tricky part of this was that each sort of node, each sort of text label in my flowchart has to have a unique name. So there were a couple of nodes that will have the same text label, but the names of them have to be different. So I ended up having to sort of append a 2 or a 3 on the end of the labels to make sure that the edges went to the correct place. Okay. So let's have a little look at how we actually create a flowchart from this. So the first thing I wanted to do was actually get the initial layout. And for that, I used the iGraph package to get what is essentially a tree layout. Okay, so my flowchart are starting from the top of the tree, and then there are various decisions coming down. And the iGraph package has a function called layout as tree, and that will sort of figure out where those node labels should actually be. So the first thing I did was create a graph from a data frame. Again, this is from the iGraph package. So if I put in my table of edges. And I need this to be a directed graph as well. I don't want my arrows going in both directions. They're only going forward through the tree. And this gives me a sort of graph object. I can then extract the coordinates of where I'm going to place my nodes using the sort of layout as tree function. Okay, so I called this coords layout as tree from iGraph of my graph object G. Okay, so if you take a little look at coords, okay, this is just a little data frame. So these are essentially my X and Y coordinates, and these are each of my 14 different nodes in my flowchart. Okay, and to make life a little bit easier later on, I set the column names of these as just being X and Y. Okay. So the next thing I did is kind of, I guess, a little bit messy, where I'm kind of trying to add attributes to each of the nodes in my flowchart. So I called this output DF, so an output data frame. And I wanted to change my coords data frame into a tibble, because tibbles are just a little bit easier to work with. And I want to add some new columns to this. So I want to add the name of the node. Okay, so all of these labels I have in my original Goldilocks data frame, I want to add that as a column. I also want to add the actual label. Okay, so I want to get rid of the 3 and the 2 to sort of define what text will be displayed in the label. And I also want to sort of color coordinate some of them, some of the different labels as well. Okay, so I created a new column called step, which is the vertex attribute from my graph object. Okay, so this is just pulling these names from the graph object here. I also created label. Okay, so looking at kind of regular expressions, all I want to do is extract these exact names except the numbers on the end of them. So I can do that with this. Okay. And I want to just sort of replace the numbers with an empty space. And I already have my step variable there. Third thing I did here was flip around the X coordinates. You can see here X are kind of negative values, which meant that my flowchart went sort of roughly from the top right to the bottom left. But what I wanted was, I wanted it to go from the top left to the bottom right. I wanted that diagonal. The easiest way to do that was just to X equals X times -1. And that just sort of flipped my X axis around for me. And I created another variable called type, okay, which I made into a factor. And this, I ended up doing this manually based on the values in this sort of Goldilocks data frame. So this, I wanted to color coordinate the different steps. I'm just going to copy and paste this from my GitHub repo here to save me typing it out. Okay, so this will basically color code the different steps. So I had sort of 1, 2, and 3 based on whether it was a sort of a decision or an output or a kind of start and end step there. Okay, so if we take a little look at my output DF, okay, so this is a tibble. You can see my X and Y coordinates from earlier. You can see here the name of the node and the label that will appear in it, as well as the type. Okay. The next step was sort of to create the actual rectangles. Okay, so my X and Y coordinates in output df gave me the center of the rectangles that will be in my flowchart. What I essentially had to do was create 4 new variables giving me the corners. Okay, so what I'm eventually going to do is pass this data into geom rect. What that needs is an xmin, xmax, ymin, and ymax. So how tall should my rectangles be and how wide should they be? Okay, so I created another new object, plot nodes, which I started with output df and added 4 new variables, xmin, so x minus was like 0.35. I kind of did have to play around with this to get the correct values for the sort of how tall and how wide the rectangles were going to have to be. So let me just create this last one. Okay. And then the final sort of object I needed to create was the edges. So these were kind of complicated to create, and yeah, it was a lot of trial and error and plotting things that didn't look so great. But essentially, I started from the original Goldilocks data frame, and I added an ID as the row number. Because I specified the sort of Goldilocks dataset in the order that I wanted it to appear, I can use a sort of row number as a way to make sure that when I'm plotting my edges, they appear in the correct order. I'm then going to sort of use pivot longer to lengthen my data set. So I'm going to use the from and to columns in my original data set. And I set the names to as being sort of start end, which I abbreviated as start E. When I ended up looking back at my code, I got very confused because I thought SE was short for standard error. So it's a reminder to name your variables something you'll actually remember what it means. I eventually figured out it was start end, and I put my values to step there. Okay. So at the moment, this is what my plot edges data frame is looking at. Okay, so you can see that the first 2 rows will relate to the first arrow I'm going to draw. Okay, so it's sort of arrow number 1, from and to, and the names of the nodes that those actually join together. I then joined this with the plot nodes dataset I just created to give me the sort of coordinates of where I actually want the arrows to start and end from. I don't want them to start and end in the middle of the node. I want them to start from what's going to be the edge of the rectangle. Okay, so doing a left join with plot nodes and joining by step, so the sort of node name. Okay, and then I just ended up using select to sort of essentially tidy up and get rid of all the bits in here that I don't need. So doing some negative selection with select to drop the columns that I know I'm not going to need. Okay, so this is what plot edges is currently looking like. Okay, again, so arrow number 1, it's the x coordinate of where it's going to start from. This is the y coordinate of where it's going to start from. and end as well. I then needed to add one more column, the Y. Okay, so I have the Y min and the Y max values of the rectangles is going from and to, and what I basically need to do is specify exactly where I want each arrow to start and end from. So I did that using an if-else statement. Okay, so if the row in my data frame is relating to an edge that it's starting from, I want the arrow to start from the bottom of the node before it. Otherwise, I want it to start from to go to the top of the rectangle below it. Okay, so I'm using it from the bottom of the rectangle above, where the arrow is ending. I want that to stop at the top of the rectangle below it. That took quite a long time for me to figure out how to get those values correct. And then I did select again, just again a little bit more tidying up, removing those Y min and Y max values. Okay, so if we have one last look at plot edges, okay, so each sort of pair of rows relates to a single arrow in my flowchart. So it's arrow number 1, where does it start, where does it end, and what are the coordinates of those start and end points. Okay. So just quickly before I go on to the actual creating the plot, I looked at choosing fonts because I know I'm adding labels. I want to pick my fonts in advance. As I said at the start, I was using the show text package. The reason I really like the show text package is that of all the font packages in R that I've tried, this one was the easiest. It's one of the font packages that seems to just work. And I have had sort of no errors or anything using it. It's also system independent, so I can, it works the same way on Linux as it does on Windows. And the other thing I like about it is you can use Google Fonts, which means you can browse through fonts. Generally speaking, I don't know what fonts look like unless I've used them a lot before. So having that ability to browse through and choose a font is quite a nice thing about the show text package. And we add fonts in with the show text package using font add Google. We add, first of all, the name of the font as it appears in Google, and then you tell it what font name you're going to use in R to refer to it. And with the show text package, we do need to run show text auto at the end once we've loaded it in. Okay. So show text auto is just kind of making that font available in your current R session. Okay. And then finally, we can actually make our plots. So starting off with the ggplot function, I'm going to add my rectangles next. So that is coming using the geomrect function. The data there is going to be my plot nodes. And my mapping here with the AES, okay, is going to be xmin, xmax, ymin, and ymax as well. Okay. And then I also want to add my text labels to appear inside the nodes. So geom text. My data is going to be my plot nodes. My aesthetics here is just going to be X, Y, and label. I find it quite useful to try and name your columns the same as the sort of aesthetic you're matching them to. It kind of makes it easier to debug later. And then finally adding the arrows. To add the arrows, you're using geompath. Okay, geompath very similar to geomline if you haven't used it before. The The only difference is that geom_line automatically sorts your data from smallest to largest on the x-axis, and that is not what we want here. I want my arrows to be defined in the way that I've specified in my data set, so I can use geom_path directly. Okay, and to add the actual arrows rather than just make it a straight line, you use the arrow function, where you can specify how large you want the arrow to be and whether you sort of want a closed or open arrow there. Okay, so if I just look at this very simple flowchart, okay, you can see that I kind of have the bare bones of my flowchart there already, and everything kind of after this point is styling. I'm aware that it's already been just over an hour. I'm happy to keep talking, but I don't know what people are like for time.
Hi, Nicola. Thank you. We still have got some time because the session is meant to end at 10 p.m. So we still have time. Please go ahead.
All right, perfect. I'll keep talking about sort of styling. So how do we go from this to this essentially? And this is all, no, we essentially have the plot, right? So it's more, how do I make the plot look the way I want it to look? So the first thing I'm going to do is change the font of my labels. Okay. So for that, in geom text, the argument that changes the font family is called family, and I'm going to make this equal to the same name I've given my font here in when I loaded the font in with the show text package. I'm also at this point going to change the color of my fonts. I will talk a little bit later about how I specifically chose the colors here. So I used specific hex colors for this, and I made my arrows the same color as well. So I'm just going to copy and paste this down here. For my different boxes, I also want the sort of boxes to be different colors. I want them to depend on that variable I created earlier called type. So I'm going to add in fill and color based on type here. Okay. And I'm also going to make them slightly transparent fill color so that you can actually still see the text and kind of the background and stuff. Okay. All right. Okay, so you can already see this is starting to get closer to that final plot that we had. The only other thing I want to do at this stage, I think, is edit the size of my arrows. These arrows are looking kind of huge compared to the size of the boxes. So I can edit my arrow function looking at the length. So I'm just going to make these 3mm arrows. Again, this was something that was kind of trial and error and figuring out exactly how big those arrows should be. It definitely wasn't a first try thing. Sort of playing around with different values until you get something that looks kind of reasonable. Okay. So the next thing I did was sort of change the default color scheme. So as soon as I sort of add fill and color based on a variable in my data, I get this default sort of pink, green, and blue color scheme. That didn't quite suit with what I had in mind. So I used some scale colors to change that. The color palettes I used were from the R Carto color palettes. That I think is my most used color palette in R. I really like the colors, and it's quite easy to find palettes that are colorblind friendly, which is a nice combination of plots that look good. So I used scale, fill, Carto D, because we're looking at discrete values. If you remember, I set type as a factor with the levels 1, 2, and 3. So I want to use my discrete color palettes here. And the palette I used was called Antique. Okay. And I did the same for color. So fill will change the sort of outline color of the boxes. And so, yeah, color changes the outline color of the boxes, and fill changes the color inside the boxes. So I'm using the same color scheme for both fill and color here. Okay, so this is just changing the box. I then started to add some additional text. So I added a title and a caption. So do that using the labs function. Okay, so just adding in character strings. So I think, yeah, the title was just the sort of Goldilocks decision tree. And then with the caption, generally speaking, when I'm adding captions or sometimes subtitles to plots for chart challenges or Tidy Tuesday or whatever, I usually put my name where the data source is from. So I put my name, and then to get a kind of new line in captions, I sort of do \n, and if you want to add space between, just create 2 new lines. There are other ways of doing this, but this is kind of the easiest way to create a new line with the right spacing. So the data source for this, I ended up putting the name of the author who wrote Goldilocks. I figured that's if anyone owns the data, it's probably him. And then just putting sort of hashtag 30-day chart challenge as well. Just to, so I remember why on earth I created this chart. Okay, so you see that adds by default my title in the top left corner and my caption there in the bottom right, and you can see where my line breaks are coming in as well. Okay. And then the last thing I did is essentially all of the sort of theme function elements in R to sort of change the background color and get rid of the sort of axes and text labels and things. So usually when we're thinking about ggplot, when we're looking at scale functions, I usually think of scales as being anything that's dependent on your data. Okay, so whether that's what's on your X and Y axes, if it's an aesthetic that's part of your data mapped to fill or color, you change the way that looks using a scale function. For anything that's not mapped to your data, that's usually changed using the themes function instead. Okay, and the function that I find really useful for this plot was theme void. Okay, and what theme void does is it just gets rid of all of the theme elements. All right, so you can see that my panel background, my axes, everything has just disappeared. Everything except the legend. Okay, and I can get rid of that using theme legend dot position equals none. Okay, and you can see that my plot is already looking a lot closer to that final version. The only thing I still want to change are I want to add a little bit of a border around my plot. When I did theme void, it's sort of gotten rid of all of the spacing around my title and my captions, squished right against the edges of my plot, and I like a little bit of a space around them. So I can change that using the plot margin function. So I can do plot dot margin equals, and plot dot margin is set using the unit function. So you can specify essentially how many centimeters of space you want around your plot. So it goes sort of top, right, left, top, right, bottom, then left is the order that these are going in. I just need to specify that'll be in centimeters. Okay, so that's just, what was missing here? There we go. Okay, so that's just added a little bit of space around my title and things. I also want to change the font of my title and the font of my caption to match the color and font that I've added in the labels. So I do that using plot.title equals element text. Okay, and here you can specify the sort of font family, the alignment of the text, whether you want bold text, the size, if you want some more margin around your text. So setting family equals to the same family I used earlier. I'm going to copy the color down here. Okay, and for the plot title, I also want it to be bold. So you change that using the face equals bold argument. And I'm going to make the size of the text really big as well. Let's make it size 40. I want to use most of the same elements for my caption, so I tend to just copy and paste them down. So we change the caption using plot.caption. I'll get rid of the bold element, and I'm going to make it a little bit smaller since it is a caption. Okay, back down to size 10. The other thing I want to change for my caption is I want it to be left aligned. So rather than being on the right hand side here, I want it over here on the left because I've got lots of empty space around here that I can fill with text to sort of balance out what's on my plots. So I can do that using the hJust argument. hJust equals 0. So if you have hJust equals 0, that's left aligned. hJust equals 1 is right aligned, like this. And if you want it center, it would be 0.5. Okay, so if we take a little look at how this is looking, okay, we're almost there. I think I've made this font a little bit too big. There we go. That works. All right. So one last, well, technically two last things to do. Two things. One, the background color, and two, adding the image. Okay, so if I just go through the plots, I have a link on here. So in terms of choosing the background color, the first thing I did was actually choose the image that I was going to add. So I found this image, I think, on the sort of New York Public Library website. It kind of has a license that anyone can use it, which was quite nice. And I used this website here, so image color picker. Okay, and what you can do is you can upload your image, and when you hover over it, it tells you what hex color that image is. So I uploaded the image I'd picked, and then was able to extract the exact hex code I needed for this image. And then I can change the background colors to match that hex code. Okay, so you can change the background colors using plot.background. Okay, and this is going to be a rectangle for your background, so it's an element underscore rect, and you're going to set your fill color to be equal to the hex code. Let me just find that. So it's going to be F2 E4 C1, and I'm going to set the color to be the same. So the color is just going to be the sort of border outline around my plot. In order to get the entire area of my plot to be this color here, I also need to set the panel background to be the same. Okay, so panel background is sort of the area directly behind your data points, and the plot background is sort of everything else, so the area behind the title. When you use the default ggplot themes, the panel is usually that gray kind of rectangle, and the plot background is default white. So you need to kind of change both plot.background and panel background to get the whole area the correct color. Okay. And this is essentially created my flowchart, recreated it exactly as I had it. The only kind of last step is adding the images. Now, technically, I could have done this using the Magic package and used cowplot. So you can use Magic to read in sort of PNG files as a variable in R, and then you can use cowplot to draw that variable on top of an existing plot. It does work, and I have used it plenty of times, and it's quite good if your sort of PNG file or something is included in your data set. For this example, I didn't actually do that. I used Inkscape. So I saved this plot here as an SVG file, and I opened it up in Inkscape and just sort of imported the PNG. And opening it in Inkscape, it probably took less than 30 seconds to get that image exactly where I wanted it to be. I knew exactly where I wanted it to be in that top right-hand corner. If I'd done that using Magic in cowplot, it probably would have taken me quite a long time of sort of up a bit, left a bit, up a bit, right a bit, to get it exactly specifying the coordinates of where I wanted it to be. So for this example, I did use Inkscape as well. This is not a 100% R plot here. And so that is the sort of final plot. So going through, how do I create my coordinates to produce the rectangles, create the coordinates to get the arrows, and then adding all those different layers of theming, and sort of choosing your fonts and color schemes to match the images that we already have, right? And so that sort of brings me to the end of my talk now. I'm happy to take questions at this point.
Let me go first. Oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed. Oh my gosh. When Joki said that we should invite you, I was like, okay. But now, I've not seen any of the chats on Twitter, or maybe I saw, but maybe amongst other things, or I was busy working. But I'm like, wait, what version of R do you use? Is there like a special people version? Oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed. Like day after day after day, I was like, no, I thought I'm an advanced car user. Um, thank you so much. I've learned like so many packages I've never heard about. And just looking at the Goldilocks flowchart, I was like, gosh, some of these things I see people posting, and I'd never thought that R could do such a thing, like honestly. I recently saw a post on Twitter where people were talking about the package used to create pictograms, and I was like, wow, okay. So it's good. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much. My first question is, are the codes you used during the challenge open source? I already have ideas I should sell so to my boss. Um, uh,
Yes.
do you have them on a certain?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So all of the codes for this challenge is on my GitHub website. There's a 30-day chart challenge repo there. So they're all in the 2022 folder. So the scripts folder has all of the R codes there. So you can click there. They're sort of ordered by the
Wow.
different days. So it should all be there. It's all open source.
We are becoming database gurus by fire by force. Um, yeah. Did I have another question? Maybe now is the time to answer the question that was asked earlier. Where do you get your ideas for
I mean,
creating?
it's a very good question, and I'm not entirely sure I have an answer for it. So I think before I actually did the 30-day chart challenge, I did the 30-day map challenge. And my ideas for that were a bit more clear cut. So I did lots of maps about Glasgow, which is kind of near where I was born, and it was kind of let's use data sources to explore data sources of something I'm interested in and want to learn more about. I also for the 30-day chart challenge, I have a list, and it is literally a little sheet of paper of plot ideas I've seen other people do, so different types of charts, and I write them down, and I think, oh, I'd quite like to learn how to make that chart, and you're kind of just waiting for the data source to come along or find an opportunity to make that chart. So for me, this was kind of an opportunity to go through that list and tick off some of the different types of plots that I'd seen or that I wanted to make. I think for me, also just seeing what other people have done in the 30-day chart challenge. Once you start posting, your Twitter timeline does kind of get filled up with lots of different charts. So anytime I'm scrolling through Twitter, it's just data viz after data viz. And that does kind of seep in, and you find ideas that way as well. So yeah, kind of combination of here's some data sources that I think would be quite interesting to explore, and also here's a bunch of charts that I'd quite like to learn how to make, and the ideas kind of fall in from that, as well as inspiration from other people that I've seen doing charts.
Okay, thank you. Njoki, anything? Oh, and will you share the slides with us? This slide?
Yeah, slides are actually already online. They're on my website. I can send a link around.
Please post the link on
Yeah.
chat if you don't mind,
Yeah.
so that we can pick it from there.
Yeah, I posted that in the chart. There's HTML PDF slides as well, and I've included the code to make the slides as well, if you want to make markdown slides as well.
Okay, Njoki?
Yes, so I had a couple of questions, but then I realized most of them you have answered along as you spoke. So I have one more question. So I realize your plots are very colorful, which is very nice. Yes, they're very intriguing to our eyes. So how do you ensure that the colors do favor color-blinded people?
That's a good question, and it is something that I admit, especially for the 30-day chart challenge, is not always something I've been super careful with. Going forward, it is something I'm trying to be more aware of. So the color palette package I mentioned here, our Carto color, has a function. Let me see if I can find a link to it here. Okay, so this is the color palette package that I used for this. And it has a function. You can do display Carto all and set colorblind friendly equals to true. And that will return only the color palettes that are colorblind friendly. So you can kind of limit your selection a little bit. If you're using the color brewer palettes, which kind of come built in with ggplot, if you use scale color brewer or fill brewer, those have options to check if they're colorblind friendly as well. So I guess, yeah, maybe instead of just using all of the colors that are available in a color palette, sort of filtering or choosing packages that have this kind of option to only use colorblind friendly palettes. There's another couple of websites out there, I can't quite remember them off the top of my head, but you can kind of like give a list of colors that you've used, and it will show you what those colors look like to someone who is sort of color impaired, and show you that actually you can't tell the difference between these colors that are sort of blending into each other. So that's maybe something to do sort of at the end to check that your bar charts, you can actually tell the difference, for example. Yeah.
Okay, thank you about that. And one last question. So like you had mentioned that some of your sources for data was Twitter. Do you have other sources where you obtained data? And how did you go about looking for data for you to visualize?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there were a couple of the prompts for the 30-day chart challenge were data sources. So there was like the OECD data and the Our World in Data. So I used those on those specific days for the prompts, but I also reused those same data sources on different days. So Our World in Data has like so much data, and it has a lot of interesting charts as well. So it's quite a good place to look for inspiration. I did also use the Tidy Tuesday dataset, sets for the days of the chart challenge that happened to be on Tuesdays. And I also went back to previous Tidy Tuesday data sets. So I started doing Tidy Tuesday in January 2021. But I think it's been running since like 2017, 2018. So there was like 150 Tidy Tuesday data sets that I'd never seen before. So I was like, I'll go and have a look and see if there's anything that kind of fits this prompt. Beyond that, kind of looking at, for me, mostly UK data sets. So we have like gov.uk has their own data sets, sort of official statistics, and the Office for National Statistics have open data sets you can download. And I found those quite interesting because for me, they're, I guess, local data sets. It's finding out about, you know, the world I currently live in was quite interesting. And those were reasonably reliable sources of data for me. There were also a couple of instances, I think, where I used sort of R packages. Not so much for the chart challenge, but when I did the map challenge back in November, there's quite a lot of data R packages out there. So either ones that have data sets included in the package or sort of essentially API wrappers. So you can, for example, grab data from like OpenStreetMap or from Google and load that straight into R. So yeah, exploring the data that's kind of comes with R to some extent was also a good way to find data sets.
Awesome, thank you. I don't have any other question. I haven't seen any question from the participant. Please feel free, we have got some few more minutes remaining. Feel free to ask Nicola as many questions as you have. And she has also left, if you look at the website, you can find a GitHub, email, LinkedIn, Twitter. So if you have a follow-up question after this, please do reach out to her and she will definitely answer your question. So,
Nicola, I have a question. Sorry, this could be digressing a bit, but is your RStudio Conf presentation something to do with this, or is it totally different?
My RStudio presentation is something completely different from this. I will be talking about Shiny apps at RStudio conference. We created a sort of bilingual Shiny app, so we'll be talking about sort of the mechanics of how we built that. I am also talking at Use R conference, which is online. It's a bit more closely related to this. I'll be talking about sort of generative art. So essentially not making charts, but creating artwork using code. And that will all be about ggplot2. So I'll be talking about that in June at Use R, and then Shiny apps at RStudio conference.
Okay, nice. I really think these challenges are good for people to like learn stuff on the go, right? Like I'm very excited to just open your GitHub and look at how you created some of these. We have a question from Martha. Out of curiosity, does some of your work face criticism given the notion of fact that some database plots are not very effective in communicating the message? And just to add on that, I've seen a lot of people post charts on Twitter and I'm like, okay, yeah, it's very beautiful, but we can't really tell anything from this.
Yeah, yeah, it does sometimes, particularly I find that this chart, it's usually if I was doing something like this that had some analysis, you'd want to write what you did, what it represents, how you calculated everything. And obviously, you know, you have like 280 characters on Twitter. You can't go into a big long essay every day. So certainly people do ask questions like, what exactly is in this chart? Usually if I was actually sort of publishing a chart properly, it would probably come along with some sort of blog post with a whole list of things to be careful about when you're looking at the chart. When you're looking at a chart on its own with one subtitle, it is, yeah, it's hard to understand. So yes, yeah, you do sometimes face criticism, or more likely people kind of ask questions like, how did you calculate a particular variable or a particular statistic, or could you have done it like this instead? So yeah, it's quite nice to engage with people, and sort of over time it kind of helps you iteratively make your work better. So for this chart, I think if I was to make it again, you'd kind of make a longer subtitle or add some sort of points at the bottom as to how things were calculated, because as soon as you make a chart and you post it on Twitter, people ask questions, and you realize, okay, what bits are missing, what is not explained clearly just by looking at the picture, what should I have added in next time? So yeah, you do get criticized, but it is ultimately the best way to make your work better, is when someone tells you what's missing. Yeah.
Okay. And have you had any of your charts, not necessarily these ones, any other published in like a very big newspaper or a blog post somewhere? And how did that make you feel, if it ever happened?
So I haven't had sort of just charts published on their own yet. I did have one article published in Significance magazine, a kind of statistical magazine. I had quite a lot of my charts in there quite recently. That was very nice. It did kind of go along with an article, but it was nice to kind of be able to create those sort of publication ready charts and know that you just made them in R. You know, you didn't spend ages sort of airbrushing them in Photoshop. You're like, I made this in R. Here's the data set. So yeah, that was very nice.
I think before today, I think the only person I knew who makes super amazing wow charts is Cedric, and now there is you. And I think you two should meet in Washington DC, because I think he'll also be
yeah.
there. Like it's quite impressive. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you so much for honoring our invitation. Wow. Okay. You know what? I had a task at work, and now I think I have a response. I have an idea of how we can present some of the data that we have. So, Njoki, that's it from me. Yeah. Thanks everyone for attending.
Yes, I agree with you, Shell. I need to create flowcharts for my thesis, and I used Word at first, and I realized they look not very good. And right now there's this. So when you're doing the illustration, I'm like, okay, now you're illustrating something that I really need. So that is nice. Okay, so when we're finishing, allow me to just share my slides, just to introduce our next very amazing incoming talk. Okay, sorry. I've shared the wrong file. Yes. Stay with me for a minute. Okay, so we have our next event, which will be held just in a few days from now. We'll be having Dr. Shannon Pileki, who will be telling us like her journey in the R-Stats. Basically, she transformed from academia to the industry, so we'll be hearing quite a lot about how the transition was all about. So we have a very awesome lineup of questions prepared for her. Please do register, and this meetup is in collaboration with Our Ladies Cologne, and it will be a first Twitter space hosted by Our Ladies event, Our Ladies chapters. So we really look forward to this event. The event is already, the event link is already active on our meetup page. Please do register, and we will see you in a couple of days as we hear another great person discuss about the R-Stats. So it will be a very nice informal hangout, and please do register, and we look forward to having you there. Okay, so I take this opportunity to thank you all. Nicola, Dr. Nicola, thank you so much for honoring my invitation and coming to share the experience and some of the things you've learned. To be honest, like how the other participants were saying, it was really mind-blowing. yeah, like endlessly shell expression about how we have blown our minds with just creating very awesome plots using R. Thank you. To our participants, thank you so much for sparing your time and joining us as well. We can't do this without you as well. So thank you a lot, and also for asking questions. If you have a further question after today, again, as I've said, reach out to Nicola. She has left the details in the slides, so please check them. And for incoming meetups, follow us on our social media platforms, and we will see you next time. Yeah, thank you so much, and feel free to leave. Yeah.
Okay, good night, everyone. Bye.
Bye, good night. So,